The breaking moment for me was when my wife and I lost our daughter. She was born on Christmas Day, 2014. We lost her 86 days later. There was just a lot of angst and turmoil. And that's when all that stuff that you've put away starts to fester and starts to come back. And if you don't have control of it, if you don't realize what's happening when it's starting to bubble up, you can get lost. Fortunately, that's when I recognized, hey, I'm not in a good spot. I don't have many friends. We just lost our daughter. I've got this history of suicide in my family. A couple months earlier, we had a crash in our squadron that killed 4 pilots and 8 aircrew. And I recognized I need somebody. We were heavily involved in our church. I had a couple key people in my life, other Marines, that were able to put that stigma aside and have some really deep conversations with me that really helped raise the awareness of where I was at mentally. My name is John Ballenger, and I am undone.
Hey friend, I am glad you are here. If this is your first episode, I hope you love it. I hope you stick around. I hope that you binge these episodes and you get inspired by high achievers who didn't let failure stand in the way of their eventual victory. And if you're regular, let me just say thanks. I've learned a lot about achievement and resilience and grit in these past 12 months, and I couldn't have done it without you. So honestly, thanks. That said, welcome to another episode of Becoming Undone, the podcast for those who dare bravely, risk mightily, and grow relentlessly. I'm Toby Brooks, a speaker, an author, and a professor. Over the past 2 decades, I've worked as an athletic trainer and a strength coach. And over the years, I've grown more and more fascinated with what sets high achievers apart and how failures can frequently be necessary steps on our path towards success. Each week on Becoming Undone, I invite new guests to examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. I'd like to emphasize that this show is entirely separate from my role as a professor, but it's my attempt to apply what I've learned and what I'm learning, and to share with others about the mindsets of high achievers. For Oklahoma native John Ballenger, childhood dreams of being a pilot started early. After high school, he attended Oral Roberts University, and as graduation drew near, he felt the pull to serve his country, eventually attending officer candidate school in the United States Marine Corps. After going to flight school, he was disappointed to learn that his goal of joining the elite Marine Helicopter Squadron 1 was squashed, at least for a time, by some speeding tickets from his youth. However, he stayed the course and at the insistence of his wife, reapplied years later, where he served both Presidents Trump and Biden before retiring from service earlier this year. No stranger to tragedy and setback, in the midst of his military career, John and his wife had to deal with the tragic loss of their newborn daughter, who passed away just months after her birth, never leaving the NICU where she was born. Prior to that, John has also had to deal with the tragedy of family suicide, losing his mother, aunt, and grandfather. Today, he's involved in a variety of pursuits, including SkillBridge for transitioning military personnel, and recently launched a new podcast. Listen in and be inspired by John Ballenger in episode 64, Brilliance in the Basics. This week, we've got John Ballenger. I owe him several apologies. We've had some calendar mishaps, and it seems like just for some reason we needed to have this conversation today instead of back in October. So, John, super stoked to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Toby, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your persistence. It definitely goes noticed, and I just appreciate the time you put into getting us connected.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've read quite a bit about you, started listening to your new show, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But really, this is our chance to really dig into your story. As I've shared off camera, my show is really about how sometimes setback and failure and things not going the way we wanted them to can really set the stage for ultimate successes. And so you've had a storied career, and now in what you refer to as the second act, where you're on to other things. I always start with a little bit of a softball. What did you want to be growing up, and why?
I think if I watched my video from kindergarten graduation, recorded on one of those massive shoulder cameras, I think I actually said to be a pilot. It was either that or an astronaut, one of the two.
I worked in the ballpark, same age, I'm not sure, but I don't know if Top Gun played a role for you, but it seems like everybody my age, for at least a time, wanted to join the military and fly a fighter jet. You ended up in the Marine Corps, and we'll talk later about your days as pilot of Marine One. So I guess start at the beginning, wherever that was for you.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and went to a small Christian school there. And while I was going to school, my parents actually got separated. And my dad ended up raising me full time by himself for several years before he got remarried. And it's interesting because while he was raising me, he was also the manager of the Tulsa airport. So he was on call 24/7 while he was raising me. And I subsequently was able to spend a lot of time with another family who helped raise me with their son and their two daughters. And so growing up, I never thought it was weird that I was spending 3-4 nights a week with my best friend. And so it was only when my dad got remarried, I realized, oh, this is not normal. And I spend more time at home than I should be spending time with my friends. But he did a great job raising me. He got remarried, and my stepmother then ended up having 2 more children. But we were raised in a wonderful house. We had dinner every night together. So I can't ever complain about how I was raised, but stayed in Tulsa, Oklahoma until college, and then was looking at which direction to go, but ended up staying local and going to Oral Roberts University, which is just a small Christian school there in Tulsa as well. And was going to be a marketing major focused on business and business management. But as I got close to graduation, just felt this urge to go be active, serve my country, do what several other people in my family had done, and really step out and do something unique. It was interesting because when I came home one day with a bunch of pamphlets for the Marine Corps, I laid them on the table. And my dad looked over my shoulder and he was blown away. He couldn't imagine what I was doing. And he grew up in a different time. He was drafted in Vietnam. And here I was signing up on my own free will to be part of the military. And so there's a lot of explaining to do. And he actually didn't expect the Marine Corps to linger so long as it did. But I joined after graduation, 3 months after graduation, went to boot camp, and then worked my way into flight school, and kind of the rest is history. 20 years later, I got out last year. And yeah, as you said, I'm on my second act. A very unique path that I was able to take, and a lot of circumstances I was able to navigate. So blessed for the career that I have had in the Marine Corps, and now post-Marine Corps, just blessed to be able to continue on.
Right. I think a lot of my guests have talked about transitions and how their identity might have been tied up in athletics or artists.
Oh, yeah.
And so they go from one season of life to the next. I've had Rich DeVinny, who's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL. And it never really crossed my mind until you were talking, like your transition, if you had second thoughts about it, it really didn't matter. You're locked in. And so talk to me about that first year or two when you made the transition from college kid at a private Christian school to being in the Marine Corps. And what did that do for that formative season of your life?
Wow, Toby, it was huge. It was a huge transition. It was a huge shift in everything I had known. I had been in Tulsa my whole life. My friends, my family, my value system was all integrated into where I was living. And then here I go and graduate. And 3 months later, I'm in Quantico, Virginia, going through boot camp that's designed for officers. It's called OCS, Officer Candidate School. And I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, what did I do? Worst case scenario, I don't go be a pilot, and I'm still locked in for 4 years in the Marine Corps. Best case scenario for me at the time was I go graduate from boot camp, go to the basic school that they have all officers go to learn how to be infantry officers. And then I go to flight school, and I graduate flight school, and now I owe the Marine Corps 8 years. As a 22-year-old looking at an 8-year commitment, that's almost a third of your life.
Right.
And it was a big reality check. What do I want to do? Where do I want this to take me? Is this truly who I am and what I intended to do?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those reality checks were a little painful as I left all the friends that I had ever grown up with and lived with. And it can be very isolating if you don't have your foundation. For me, it was in my faith. If your foundation is not strong in who you are, it can be a very alienating place to be. And fortunately, my family stuck with me. The friends, I left them, but every time I'd come back to Tulsa, they were still there supporting me. And as we all do, we gain friends as we go along. So I was really fortunate to build up that support network to keep me encouraged and to keep pushing and keep driving. And I had also some phenomenal mentors back in my Tulsa days that really helped encourage me while I was going through all that stuff.
Absolutely. So you end up being pilot of Marine One, and I have to imagine that's probably a highly coveted spot, super competitive. Maybe that kindergartner didn't really have that amount of clarity or granularity on, I want to be the pilot of Marine One.
Yeah.
But at what point did that dream or goal or ambition start to really materialize for you?
Toby, throughout my career in the Marine Corps, we train and we get ready to deploy, and then we go out to a deployment and get to show how well we are trained and what we're made of. And I tell people, those deployments are like the Super Bowl for people in the service. That's where we get to go out and we get to prove our work and really get to test it. And it was on one of those deployments that I had been talking to another pilot who was also applying, and he challenged me. He said, if you think you're good, why don't you try to apply for this squadron, because it's the best of the best for helicopter pilots in the Marine Corps. And he goes, that will tell you whether you're good or not. And interestingly enough, I sat on it for a while, and then I ended up applying. It was a very unique and opportune time for my wife and I, because we had no kids. We were already living close to DC. It wasn't going to require much of us. And I put in my package to apply and got very far along the way. And unfortunately enough, my background and my security clearance came back and disqualified me. I had too many speeding tickets on my record. They said, hey, sorry, you're not going to make it this year, but you can wait 5 to 6 more years and maybe reapply.
Imagine the disappointment. After completing college, John feels an unshakable need to serve his country and decides to join the United States Marine Corps. After successfully completing officer candidate school, he goes on to flight school where he does well. And at some point, the possibility of piloting Marine One comes up. Now, in case you weren't paying attention during your current events class in high school, or you don't gravitate toward government and politics, any U.S. Marine Corps aircraft carrying the president is designated as Marine One. Pilots are selected from the elite Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, also known as HMX-1 or the Nighthawks, which is a freaking awesome name, by the way. Current models cost more than $237 million apiece. They can fly at speeds of over 150 miles per hour, and they're outfitted with ballistic armor and anti-missile countermeasures. They also feature protection against electromagnetic pulses in the event of a nuclear strike. Now, the Marine Corps doesn't entrust that investment or that technology to just anyone. The Nighthawks are headquartered and trained in Quantico, Virginia. And while John's performance in his early career was enough to get him considered for the elite squadron, a series of speeding tickets from earlier in his youth was enough to eliminate him from consideration. Undeterred, he opts to keep growing, keep serving, and keep moving forward in the hopes that someday he might get another shot.
Again, faced with 5 to 6 years, I'm now 28, 29. I'm thinking, man, that's a long time to wait. But I did. I waited and I kept doing the basic things, the things that I knew were going to continue to prove successful for me in my career. So just being good at what I was entrusted with. And it wasn't until about 5 years before my career was ending, I went back to my wife and I said, hey, I know this isn't a unique time anymore because we have kids now. We have 2 kids. and I'm getting ready to end my career. I'm kind of focused on the next thing. And I said, I don't know if I should apply. And she said, you know what? You should apply, because if you don't, you'll always wonder if you were good enough. You'll always have that thing in the back of your mind. And man, I took that to heart and I applied, and fortunately enough, I got accepted. And it is competitive, but it's such a great place to be. It's such a great mission, supporting the president and his staff and the administration, getting to and from where they need to go, and doing it in such a high visibility mission, doing it in such a way that you can continue to prove yourself faithful and successful at completing the basics. So right. Yeah, it was a whirlwind time getting me there, but very fortunate that my wife prodded me to try one more time and get in. So
sure. As you're talking, I'm reminded of a quote that you shared on social media, and it was on your show not long ago, where sometimes it's not failure, it's success deferred, I believe is how you quoted it.
Yep.
That season in between, and I'm laughing because we all think of fighter pilots as being like hair on fire and driving fast everywhere.
Sure.
That's innate in your DNA, and yet it was a reason to disqualify you. In that season where you knew, okay, I can't get in now, I'm probably not going to get in next year, maybe not even going to apply. What did you do in that season in between? Was it a purposeful journey to make yourself a better candidate, or were you on to other things?
Toby, I just continued doing what I was supposed to do. I talk a lot about brilliance in the basics, just being good at the basics and the things that can build upon each other to make you great. For a Marine, the greatest thing a Marine can think of is being next to other Marines and supporting Marines. And that's flying the helicopter that I was flying. I was dropping Marines, sailors off all over the country, all over different war zones. And so that to me was what I was supposed to continue doing. And I didn't look at the rejection the first time from the squadron as a closed door. I just looked at it as maybe not right now, if ever, but not right now. And when I tried to close the door later on in my career and just tell my wife I wasn't going to apply because I didn't feel like it was the right time, and there was going to be a lot at stake for my family, and they were going to have to endure a lot. I was really encouraged by her just telling me to pursue that. So a closed door or a not right now turned into an open door.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Sure. So you ultimately are accepted and you make it into the elite of the elite. What did that season of your life teach you that maybe you hadn't been privy to or hadn't learned up to that point in your career? What did being in that role as Marine One pilot show you?
Wow. My whole aviation career, I was always one of those that had to put in a little bit more effort than everyone else, whether it was things that just didn't come as data and information that I didn't retain as well as other people, or maybe I had to work harder to get some of the systems understood or some of the different methodology down. I had to always work through those things as a normal aviator in the Marine Corps, flying Marines around combat zones. It was going to be no different. And I knew that going in. I knew that I learned differently than some other people. I was a little slower than some other people. And it was just going to require some intestinal fortitude to really get in there and be intentional about learning and mastering the skills that would require me to do this mission. And so I went in really knowing that it was going to take a lot. And there's a quote from one of our previous commanding officers where he says, it's not outstanding Marines doing an ordinary mission. It's ordinary Marines doing an outstanding mission. Mm. And that really baselines us all. It just tells us, hey, when you come in the door, you're no different than the guy to your right or left. You got in, you're filling a position, you have a job to do it well. And I would say that I was surrounded for those 5 years at the Marine One Squadron. I was surrounded with some incredible professionals, humble. They were just so in tune with the aircraft and what they needed to know and how they needed to operate. It was amazing. And I knew that when I got accepted, I would be with that caliber of person. And so I still don't know how I got selected, but I feel very fortunate to be around those individuals because they taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about just professionalism in uniform. And when you think that you've made it to the top, there's still a lot of work to go.
Sure. I love your quote, brilliance in the basics, and the idea that there aren't rock stars on the team. We are all equally capable. And that's a different mindset than maybe what corporate America would teach us, or certainly high level athletics. There are those that seem to think that they're a little bit more important than the rest of the team. But I love that mentality or that mindset that we're ordinary and we're going to perform extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
You're no stranger to setback and adversity. As I was reading through your bio, you mentioned that you suffered some pretty grievous losses. Mother, aunt, grandfather, all lost to suicide.
Yep.
What did those experiences do within you, or how did that shape who you are as a man, as a believer?
Wow. I was detached from my mother's side of the family when my father and mother got divorced. And so it was more of something that happened that's not right in your face, but it's still you definitely deal with it on a daily basis. And having that loss, at first, you're wondering what you could have done different or what you did to cause that situation, especially for my mother. And there was a time where I tried to reach out and we just kept missing each other. And then shortly after that period of time, she ended up committing suicide. It was right before January 1st, 2000. And you question a lot about what you've done or what you haven't done. And is this something that's going to define you, especially when it's three people on one side of the family? You start thinking, is this my fate? Is this what's going to happen to me? And people are on both sides of the fence that say either, yeah, it's in the blood. You got to really strive to fight against this mindset. And then there's the other people that say, no, you're better than that. You can fight it off, but it's a seed that's definitely planted. And it's a seed that if I wasn't who I was in my faith and didn't have the people around me, like my wife and my parents, man, that seed can grow. But you keep realizing what you're blessed with, and you keep looking at the opportunities that are ahead of you, and you think, man, there's so much out there. There's so many things that I can do and do well. I'm going to keep giving it a shot. It is a true testament to the faith in my upbringing and my dad's resilience while he was a single father, to really keep encouraging me to grow and be surrounded by really good friends and really good families.
Mm-hmm. My maternal grandfather died by suicide before I was born. And I've been working on a book for a while. I've struggled with depression in certain seasons, for sure, more so than others. But I think you're absolutely right. We wrestle with, is this a genetic defect that I was pre-programmed with? Am I susceptible to this more than someone else? And I think I could certainly see how that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if I allow the enemy to convince me that this is your lot in life, you don't have any choice around it, then you could see how someone could head down that road.
Yeah.
But I think we have to rely on those around us. We have to find ways to cope, whether that's therapy, whether that's self-care, whatever that is. I teach a behavioral medicine class for our athletic training students, or master students. And there was a quote I came across, and it talks about in high-level athletics how stigmatizing it is to have mental health concerns. And the quote was, maybe second only to the military, is it more stigmatized, in particular for a man, to admit that he's depressed or that he's suffering from anxiety. It's seen as weakness.
Sure.
Did you have seasons where your mental health was of concern while in the military? And maybe you've already answered this in talking about your faith, but talk me through that mental health journey, knowing your genetic predisposition and then being in that highly stigmatized environment of the military.
Yeah. Toby, I think when you detach yourself from suicide in your family and kind of compartmentalize it, it's sometimes a good thing, but it can come back to be a very bad thing because it seems like it can sit there and grow and fester and continue to build upon itself until it is too late or until there's a breaking moment. And I'll tell you that the breaking moment, I think, for me was when my wife and I lost our daughter. She was born on Christmas Day in 2014, and we lost her 86 days later. She lived in the NICU her whole life. And my wife and I were faced with coping with the loss of our daughter, but raising our firstborn son. And there was just a lot of angst and turmoil and lack of communication. And that's when all that stuff that you've put away starts to fester and starts to come back. And if you don't have control of it, if you don't realize what's happening when it's starting to bubble up, you can get lost in different ideas or have different conversations, even if it's just with yourself. And so fortunately, that's when I recognized, hey, I'm not in a good spot. I'm here in Hawaii with my family. I don't have many friends. We just lost our daughter. I've got this history of suicide in my family. A couple months earlier, we had a crash in our squadron that killed 4 pilots and 8 air crew. So there's a lot of stuff. And I was fortunate enough to recognize I need an outlet. I need somebody. And so we were, heavily involved in our church in Hawaii. I had a couple key people in my life, other Marines, that were able to put that stigma aside and have some really deep conversations with me that really helped raise the awareness of where I was at mentally and allow me to get out a lot of things, a lot of feelings. And then in turn helped me begin to communicate with my wife better, talk to my son a little bit more, and just be more vulnerable to that past.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a quote dear friend, one of my former guests, Michael Tyson, shared with me. He says the enemy wants to insulate us and then isolate us and then eliminate us. And what you just described is you're undoing the insulation, and it can be really hard. You don't have to be in the military or on an NFL team to feel averse to opening up and sharing your emotions with another human being. But there's power in that. And I'm looking at myself in the camera right now as I say this, because I've done a really poor job of that. And I think it's not just something that maybe we ought to do, but we owe it to ourselves. And the flip side of that is, man, what a blessing it is if someone comes to me and asks me to fill that role in their life, even if it's for a season, just to be that confidant and to be that person to help shoulder some of that load in that time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing when you allow yourself to be open and vulnerable to people, how they attach themselves to that. And then they become open and vulnerable as well. And there's a lot of healing, I think, in that. And that's why I try to share these stories of the suicide and the divorce and the loss of our daughter and the various crashes and failures that I've had along the way, because we as men do a horrible job of opening ourselves up to that, opening that door up for some negativity to come in or to change the way people may look at us or think about us. And so I want to be the counter to that and open myself up so that hopefully other people will feel the ability to do the same.
Yeah. I think in this podcasting space, there's a real tendency to look at the quantitative data, like how many listens did I get, or how many people liked my post. And that speaks to breadth, like what kind of reach do I have? But I think in the moments when that's not super encouraging, or maybe I'm not hitting the targets, it's depth, it's qualitative data. Am I making a difference? Am I sharing something that inspires at least one person? And so I guess that's a natural kind of pivot point for us. So you retire from the military. You're involved in a program called Skill Bridge that assists with transitioning military personnel. You're a partner and founder with Aspire Development Group, 828 Ventures, your podcast. So lots going on.
Yeah.
Talk me through maybe the initial transition. A lot of times on this show, we talk about the last time you turned that office light off or the last time you turned that key in. The military had been your identity in maybe not superseded by your faith, but certainly you probably introduced yourself as a Marine or as Marine One Squadron. What did that loss of identity do for you or to you in those initial days, weeks, and months following your retirement?
It was hard. Now that I'm a year out and looking back, I realize some of the things that I fell into, some of the traps that I fell into. But you're right. In the military, I tell people that aren't familiar with the military, even when you're in your most basic uniform, you still have your rank on your collar and your name on your uniform. So you're representing a lot. You've got Ballenger on one side, U.S. Marines on the other. So I know who I'm representing, but I've got my rank. And whenever you walk into a room with the rank on, you immediately size yourself up. Am I one of the most senior guys here? Am I one of the most junior guys? And in doing that, there's a little bit of freedom too, because where you fit in, right? And who you fit in with. When you get dressed up in your dress uniform, it's even worse because you've got your rank, you've got some shooting badges, and you've got your whole resume on the left side of your chest in the form of ribbons and medals, and everybody can see what you've done and they size you up. And so in one way, it's really freeing because when you walk into a place where you stand, when you take that uniform off and you become civilian, John, and you walk into a place and maybe I'm going in to speak or I'm going in to just listen. Well, I don't know where I break out anymore because it's not clear. And so that can just be disorienting for some people, but I immediately got out, Toby, and I immediately tried to fill every moment I had of free time with something going in some direction. And I always told people I'm a ready, fire, aim kind of guy. Let's get the bullet out of the chamber. Let's get it down range, and then we'll course correct and adjust as it goes. For the past year, that's basically what I've been doing, is just filling all my time with meetings and networking and getting projects started and completing projects. And so it's been good because I've learned a ton in this past year about myself and about my teammates and what my efforts can lead to. But it's also a cautionary tale to some who want to get out and follow that path, because a lot of action doesn't actually mean you're doing anything important. And I looked at my daily schedule and evaluated what I was doing and how successful I was by how many things I had on my calendar, when some of them weren't actually pushing the needle. And in fact, it was just taking away the time that I had with my family or with my true friends. And so in this last year, it's been a big learning curve to figure out how I prioritize my time and how I make those appointments and what I value. And I always told people that in my list of priorities, it was God and my faith, it was my wife, then my kids, and then everything else. But I constantly found things working their way into that priority stack and taking away from the things that I said were important, taking time away from those things. And so I had to constantly reevaluate. And now I think I'm at a much better place now that I'm a year out, in saying, okay, does this add value to my faith? Does this add value to my wife or my kids? If not, okay, I know where it comes into play. If it does add value to those things, how does it add value? And do I keep it as a priority?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we all have to work and we all have to push that needle and make a good life for our families. But sometimes those actions can really result in negative impacts to those we love the most.
For sure. Another Oklahoma guy, a friend of mine, Neil Kennedy, he's the founder of 5 Star Man. He frequently says, if it doesn't align with your purpose, then it's a distraction. And that's the measuring tool that, just like, you can very easily fill up that schedule, that calendar. I saw it demonstrated one time. A speaker had one of those 6 outlet power strips, and he said, this is us. This is our time. And he starts plugging in faith and family and job. And he says, so not long before all 6 spots are filled up. And then suddenly, like, the last one maybe drops off, responsibility at work you had. So what do? We don't plug one thing back in. We plug another 6 outlet power strip in. And now, I've got more capacity. Before you know it, you've daisy chained 24 outlets together, and you're so overwhelmed and you're not effective.
Yeah.
So a year out now, you've had a chance to process a storied military career. What would you say was the high point of your service to the Marine Corps?
Wow. Serving the Marines and serving the president, flying Marines with Marines in the back and flying with the president in the back. While they are obviously very different in significance, there is the responsibility for the pilots up front should be no different. And it was never different for me. There may be different spikes of excitement or adrenaline, or there's different circumstances that you're getting yourself into, but serving my country, serving the Marine Corps, and then walking out faithfully, walking out with your head, being able to hold your head up high and say, man, 20 years, I never would have thought, I never saw it coming, but I did it. And looking at my wife, who stayed with me, we've been married for 15 years and she was with me for 18. So majority of my career, and to say, we did it. We stayed together, even through the loss, losing our daughter. The statistic at the time was 83% of marriages fail when there's a loss of a child. Wow. In that family. And so looking back on that and saying, we did it, and looking at my faith and seeing how it never wavered significantly. And I always had my faith in Christ and who I was, and it never wavered. And looking at my 2 boys now and seeing them and their lives, and thinking it could have all gone differently in drastic ways. Mm-hmm. But summing up the career, 20 years in the Marine Corps, saying, I've still got my marriage, my faith, my kids. It was a good ride. And then everything else, it was a cherry on the top. The deployments I got to do, and the men and women I got to serve with, and the experiences and stories that I got to have out of that 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's tremendous. It's been said that failure can teach us more than success ever can. What would you say you've taken away from the setbacks or the failures in your life that were lessons that only failure could have taught?
I failed a lot, from learning how to just fly aircraft. I know I had a couple of flights where I would walk back and think, man, I could have done something different. I could have studied a little bit more. I could have been more prepared. And that's on me. And looking at those small failures way back when, and being able to build upon them and realize how you need to grow. That's what I'm proud of. That I'm proud of. Yeah, I failed a lot. The end goal or the end result is not shrouded in failure. It's shrouded in success. And there's days in my marriage or in my faith where I feel, man, I'm not stacking up today. You have the decision right then to give up or to keep pursuing. And I like to tell people when I go speak, there's a quote that says, life is 10% what actually happens to you, 90% what you do about it. And there's failures in my life, the divorces, the suicides, the deaths that could have radically changed the direction of my life or the outcome of my career. And I'm just blessed to say now they didn't change. They made me stronger. I've got a lot of things that I took away as learning points and a lot of things that I am now teaching people about and how to navigate those circumstances. And so failure can define you if you let it. Mm-hmm. And I've just been blessed to be around it, but it not shake me from my foundation.
Right. I'm an Arizona alum. That's where I did my grad work. And I read, I believe it was in the alumni magazine, Arizona had they call it biosphere, and they've done it twice now. And it's a self-contained environment. And scientists were stumped with biosphere 2 because completely self-contained environment, trees would grow and they would fall over before. It wasn't like they were dying or whatever. They would just fall over. And what they discovered was in this self-contained environment, the tree never encountered wind. And without wind, the root structure never grew like it should. And I read that and I thought, big failures are one thing, but even little minor inconveniences are like those little breezes, that little gust of wind, and it forces me to course correct. You as a pilot know if you encounter a sudden unexpected gust, like you have to correct, or I'm speaking well outside my area of expertise. But the point is, if we encounter that resistance, then we either crash or we correct.
Yep.
And there's strength in knowing that maybe the whole reason I'm encountering this obstacle today is so that my root structure can be better. And I just walked away from that really inspired.
No, that's good. That's a great parenting tip, Toby. I look at my boys and they're all boy. And sometimes my wife and I we try to distance ourselves from them and what they're doing to let them encounter that hardship or have a little failure here and there. Because you're right, if everything's provided for them, at some point they're going to either fall over because it's not right there in front of them, or they're not going to know how to adapt.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the deep irony that you're allowing your kids to encounter this, and the term helicopter parent is just the opposite of that. That's the dad joke for the day right there. John Ballenger is not a helicopter parent.
Nope, not at all.
So tell us what your days look like today. Lots going on.
Yeah. So Aspire is still full and we're working on a project. That's my development company that I've started with 2 other partners. And we're focused on urban infill projects or redevelopment of projects either in Colorado Springs, Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Oklahoma City. And we're trying to make some things work. It's a lot of setbacks. We spent 8 months on our project and it's a lot of money, and it ended up not closing, and that's a setback. And early on in my post-military career, I was thinking, what am I doing? Spending 8 months on something that I've got nothing to show for now. But that's all in the learning process, and it's all in the real estate game. And so I've got that and love my partners. They're tremendous assets to me, and I'm learning so much through them. I'm also coaching. So I've got a coaching practice really focused on people that have goals in mind that just need the extra incentive, the extra push, and the extra accountability to get where they want to go. And so I started that because, as I said earlier, I'm a ready, fire, aim. Starting for me is not a problem. I can start, as evidenced by our podcast. We started it, and here we are 12 episodes later in 3 months, and we just said go. So starting has never been a problem. It's the refinement that I struggle with after the bullet's out of the chamber. But finding people that are having the hard time starting is really what I wanted to focus on, because that's my strength. And so I've been able to speak to people in one-on-one and group settings and just figure out what is keeping them from getting started, achieving the goals, and seeing the results that they want to see. And it's been tremendously fun. I've learned a ton from them, probably more from them than they've learned from me. So I've been doing that. And then I've been speaking a little bit here and there, small groups, small corporate groups. Again, being able to share my story, talk about brilliance in the basics, and how being, really dedicated to those things, those foundational things in their business will allow them to grow, to see things reach heights that they've never been able to reach before. So that's been keeping me pretty busy. And then we launched our podcast 3 months ago, The Second Act. Again, focused on individuals that were just like me, put a lot of energy, effort, and time into something like a 20-year military career, or for my co-host, 18 years in the tech world, and then to step away from that, to completely lose your identity and to go into something else. And so the second act is talking about our failures on a personal level and our struggles and day-to-day gains and losses, so that other people can hear that, hey, even if I'm a presidential helicopter pilot or Michael's exited 3 tech businesses successfully, you can still wake up and feel like a failure. You can still daily have that imposter syndrome that sets in that you've got to overcome. We feel if we can share that, other people will hear it, and hopefully it will shorten their distance to success.
Yeah. There's certainly power in not feeling like we're alone in those emotions, and just knowing that high achievers deal with some of those same doubts is inspiring for me. And I know it is for a lot of people. What advice would you give a child who is in pursuit of your childhood dreams?
To anchor themselves in who they are. I always like to say that we're more resilient than we think we are. Going through a divorce, going through a suicide, going through a loss of a child, I heard a lot of people say, man, I could never do what you did. And I like to counter with, I bet you could. I bet you could if you just were put in that position. Life, again, provides us with a lot of opportunities. And I don't want people to sell themselves short before they get into that environment, because I bet they will be able to succeed a lot better than they think they can initially. But also to the support from friends and family is so important. Had I not had the support from my friends going into the military, and then from my wife while I was in, and my kids, and now my support structure here as in retirement, I would not be where I am. And I would definitely not be enjoying it as much as I am, because I have them around me. Really knowing who you are, betting on yourself, and building up that network around you, that foundation of support around you is really imperative to how far you're going to go. We hear you're the sum of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And I believe that to be true. I believe that to be true on many levels, from your faith, from your knowledge and your experiences. People have so many things to give you, so much information to give you, and so much support to give you. Surround yourself with people that you want to be like, and that will make all the difference.
Yeah. Sage advice. Next to the last one. I love music and the emotions that it can frequently represent. If we were to play a montage of your life, what song would you pick to play in the background, and why?
Man, I really wish you would have given me this question ahead of time so I could have thought about it. But I love music, and I love so many different types of music. And throughout my life, I've gone on road trips and just gone through CD after CD. Or that is a great question. I don't know. Tell me yours.
Brand new, actually. I'm a music guy for sure. I just interviewed Jacob Slichter, who was the drummer for Semisonic. Remember the song Closing Time?
Yeah.
and they blew up and then went away really quickly. There's a song called El Matador. It's a great listen, but for my season in life, it's introspective. It's about the change of seasons. And I've got a daughter who's a junior in college, a son who's a senior in high school. And it's been tough it's almost like a slow motion. You can see the page of your life turning and there's nothing you can do about it. But what I love about it is it's not just this somber, grief-filled description. It's about a day at the beach and looking back on your life and realizing how fortunate you were to get to spend it there. And what you have to look forward to is it still lays ahead. That would have been a different answer a week ago. So this is why I love podcasting. Like, I learned some really cool stuff from some really cool people.
A little known fact about me is I went to Oral Roberts University, but so did Ryan Tedder, who is the lead singer of One Republic. And he has written some phenomenal songs for huge artists. He is a huge artist in my own mind. But I've been on a big One Republic kick lately and listening to it with my boys, and they're infatuated with the fact that I went to school with this guy. And so there's a song he wrote called Connection, and it just talks about being in a sea of people and looking for that one connection. And I like it because I'm innately connected in my faith to God, and I've got a wonderful wife who supported me, and my friend network has really made me who I am. So that's, I don't know, maybe that's the one that comes to mind right now.
No, that's cool. On my website, as well as on Spotify, I have a playlist. It's like a mixtape for all my guests, and I put all their songs together, and I love it. I'll listen to it while I work out sometimes, and I'll just be reminded of a guest that I interviewed 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I'm like, oh, so I just love the connection that creates. Yeah. So how can listeners connect with you?
Yeah. I appreciate you asking, Toby. Our podcast is the second act with Michael and John, and the website is www.michaelandjohn.com. I'm on LinkedIn. That's really the only social media that I have. I love for people to reach out there, and that's where I get a lot of the coaching connections that I have, is people just direct message me there. And then our Aspire development group is, we've got our website, and it's Aspire, ASPIRE dev DEV group group.com. So there should be plenty of ways people to reach out if they want. And I'd love to connect. I'd love to figure out a way that I can help them in their journey and help inspire them.
Fantastic. John, it's been a treat having you on. I really appreciate your vulnerability, your insights. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Man, Toby, thank you. Thanks for your persistence again. It was a pleasure being on the show. Hey, my name is John Ballenger, and I am undone.
For John, it hasn't been easy, but then again, he never wanted it to be. His mantra of brilliance in the basics is a reminder and an encouragement for me to set aside all the fluff and the extra window dressing and instead focus specifically on my purpose. I'm thankful to John for dropping in today, for being vulnerable and sharing his story, and for inspiring us with it. If you haven't checked it out yet, be sure to listen into his new show, The Second Act, wherever you get your podcasts. Just be sure to come back here and listen to mine. Insert smiley face. For more info on today's episode, be sure to check it out on the web. Simply go to undonepodcast.com/EP64 to see the notes, links, and images related to today's guest, John Ballenger. I know there are great stories out there to be told, and I'm always on the lookout. So if you or someone you know has a story that we can all be inspired by, tell me about it. Surf on over to undonepodcast.com, click that Connect tab in the top menu, and drop me a note. Coming up, I've got financial planner, father of triplets plus one, and host of the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast, Paul Finner. I've also got a throwback episode coming up with my daughter, Brendan Brooks, and former Division I softball player turned orthopedic physician assistant, Kelly Henderson Chapman. So stay tuned. This and more coming up on Becoming Undone. Becoming Undone is a Nitro Hype creative production written and produced by me, Toby Brooks. If you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact me at undonepodcast.com. Follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn at Becoming Undone Pod. And follow me at Toby J. Brooks on X, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm asking Santa for just one thing for Christmas this year, and I promise it won't cost you a penny, and it'll make my day. If you listen, please subscribe and leave me a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time, everybody, keep getting better.